So this is the third video in my early modern philosophy series. This one is on Leibniz and Wolff. Leibniz is influenced by Descartes and Spinoza, and he's also a mathematician along with Descartes. He invents calculus. Isaac Newton also invented calculus at the same time. I guess it was just in the air. There was a huge rivalry between Newton and Leibniz. We'll talk more about Newton as we get into Kant's text, as well as talking about Leibniz. Leibniz's central doctrine is that every substance is a monad. A monad is an individual active substance or a soul, and every substance, everything that exists, is a monad, right? So everything that exists is an individual active substance and has a soul, right? And Leibniz talks about the fact that for him, a monad has no windows. Now, what he means by saying that a monad has no windows is that from inside a monad, there is no influence from the outside. So I'm a monad, and my consciousness has no influence from the outside, right? So for Leibniz, what you have is a pre-established harmony, a harmony that's established by God between what goes on inside of my monad and what goes on inside all of the other monads. So every monad, myself included, yourself included, but also your dog included, the rock included, every monad is a microcosmos, a mirror of the universe, a cosmos, a universe of its own that mirrors the rest of the universe. So the entire process of consciousness is a self-development of a monad, and the world is a system of monads. Monads are potentially all alike, but not every monad is at the same stage of development. So the lowest monads are of inorganic nature, so the monad in the rock, and those have no consciousness. They're called sleeping or naked monads. Organic natures, living nature, the lower ones have unconnected representations. So you think about a lizard has representations, but it doesn't have connected representations, right? So it doesn't necessarily remember. It may know by instinct somehow that, look, this fly is something that is tasty and nutritious for me, for lizards, but it doesn't necessarily have the kind of memory that would allow it to go back and reflect that yesterday it was discouraged because it didn't catch the fly that it went after, and so today it's not afraid that it might have the same experience again, right? So Leibniz means something like that in saying that in lower organic nature, lower living nature, the representations within that monad are not necessarily connected, whereas in a higher organic monad, you have connected streams of representations. And so, let's say a more intelligent animal, like today we would probably say an ape, a dolphin, an elephant, might have connected streams of representations, but those streams of representations might not have a logical connectedness. They might have some kind of connectedness, but not a logical connectedness, like an understanding of cause and effect. Human beings, right at the top of organic nature, have connected representations. They have a logical connectedness, and we're able to actively develop our consciousness of representations and their logical connectedness to one another. God for Leibniz is the monad of monads. So God has complete consciousness of everything that is, and God has complete self-consciousness of what God is. Whereas every other monad that exists has incomplete consciousness. Human beings come closest to God's consciousness and self-consciousness, but we don't get all the way there. Right? We're godlike, but we're not gods. Leibniz also, for reasons I can't entirely explain, teaches that the world that exists is the best of all possible worlds. So you see in Leibniz the model of the optimistic Enlightenment philosopher. And Enlightenment is the movement that Kant and Hegel will take off from, that sort of has its beginning, its root in the French Revolution. Wolff, looks like Wolff. Wolff is somewhat of a revival of scholasticism seen through Leibnizian lenses. And so what Wolff is trying to do is connect something like the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas with the philosophy of Leibniz. And I mention Wolff very briefly, just because Kant's early university training was suffused with Leibniz and was suffused with the teachings of Wolff. And so when Kant talks about rationalist metaphysics, or he often calls it dogmatic metaphysics or simply dogmatism, he's not necessarily talking about Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas or Descartes. He's really talking about Leibniz and Wolff, a particular brand of metaphysical thinking that tries to say something about being as such in the face of the revolutions in modern science that are brought about in part through the development of mathematics that I've spoken about a couple of times. So Kant's university training is in this Leibnizian, Wolffian school of rationalist or dogmatic metaphysics, or again, sometimes Kant simply refers to that as dogmatism. So for Wolff, he is especially known for dividing the powers of the human soul into higher knowledge, lower knowledge, higher desire, and lower desire. Let me just talk about all four of those briefly in turn. So you have two capacities for knowledge, the higher and lower. You have two capacities of desire, the higher and the lower. So the higher knowledge capacity is understanding and reason. Kant distinguishes those two, taking off from Wolff, and so we'll talk in the class face-to-face about that distinction between understanding and reason, the way it plays out in Kant. The lower knowledge capacity for Wolff involves sensation, what's coming to us through the five senses, and memory, right? What Kant will talk about is the reproduction of what has happened to us in our sense experience. Then there are these two capacities for desire. The higher capacity for desire for Wolff is rational desire, our desire for knowledge. But we also have a desire for sensation. We want physical pleasure. We want the pleasures of sense experience, and those belong to what for Wolff is our lower capacity of desire. Okay. These capacities of desire are really connected with willing or with action, whereas the knowledge capacities are connected to consciousness. That is the kind of consciousness by which we encounter and know objects in the physical world and in the interior world of the soul or consciousness. Kant's language for the powers of the mind largely derive from Wolff's division, but Kant reinterprets them to fit his own theory. Okay. Wolff gives a cosmological proof for the existence of God. A cosmological proof is the proof from design. Look at all of the apparent design in the world. It must have had a designer. Let's call that God. That's the cosmological proof. And Wolff also gives what's called the physico-theological proof, which is, there appear to be purposes in nature. They must have an intelligent creator. Both of those come back in Kant's critique of theology. Wolff agrees with Leibniz fundamentally that our world is the best of all possible worlds. Kant gets some of that optimism from Wolff, but Kant's optimism turns out to be focused in the political arena. Kant thinks that human history is moving over a long period of time in the direction of progress toward enlightenment and progress toward justice. So that's the end of the third video. The fourth and final video will treat Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, who are the classical empiricists.